Some men find out too late what has been happening in their own house while they were away building a life that paid for it. I am not one of those men. Not anymore. But I want to be honest with you about something before I start. I almost was. I came closer to missing it than I am comfortable admitting. And the thing that saved me was not cleverness. It was 3 days and a flight change and a brass latch on the outside of the bedroom door that I had not thought about in 20 years. My name is Gerald Moss. I am 67 years old. I live in Columbus, Ohio, and I have lived in the same house on the same quiet street in the same neighborhood for 34 years. I am a retired civil engineer, 31 years with the same firm, Meridian Structural Group. The last 11 of those as senior project lead on infrastructure contracts most people drive over every morning without a second thought. Bridges, mostly. A few highway overpasses. One pedestrian walkway over the Scioto River that I am quietly proud of, though I would not say that to anyone who hadn't asked directly. I say all of that not to impress you, but because the kind of man I am did not arrive fully formed. It was built the same way everything I ever worked on was built. Slowly, with attention to what is underneath, with the understanding that the foundation determines everything that goes on top of it. Patience is not my personality. It is my practice. There is a difference. Personality is what you are. Practice is what you choose every day, because you've decided that it produces better results than the alternative. I retired at 62. My wife, Patricia, had been a dental office manager for 26 years, organized, precise, warm in the specific way of someone who has spent decades making anxious people feel safe in a chair. She retired the same spring I did. We had a plan. Nothing elaborate. A used camper, a 2019 Lance 1575, which I researched for 4 months before purchasing. Road trips, national parks, small towns we had always meant to stop in for the first 2 years of retirement. That is exactly what we did. We put 23,400 miles on that camper. I have the logbook. Then our son called. Welcome to Dad's Raw Revenge. Get comfortable because this one is going to take you somewhere. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, you're going to love it here. Daniel Moss is 41 years old. He is my only child. He has his mother's eyes and my stubbornness, which is a combination that has served him well in some contexts and not at all in others. I love him without condition. I want to say that plainly because what follows could suggest otherwise, and I don't want you to draw the wrong conclusion. Loving someone without condition does not mean extending that love without limit. Those are different things, and the difference matters enormously for everything I am about to tell you. He called on a Wednesday evening in late February, 2.5 years ago now. He and his wife, Kristen, were having some financial difficulty. His words, a rough patch, nothing catastrophic. He had been let go from a project management position at a mid-sized logistics company. Kristen worked part-time at a dermatology practice. They had some savings, but the math wasn't working. He asked if they could stay with us for a few months while he found new work, and they rebuilt their footing. Patricia was sitting across from me at the kitchen table, that round oak table she picked out in 1991, and has refinished twice since, once after a water ring from a flower vase, and once just because she felt like it, and I watched her face while Daniel was talking. She was already nodding before I said anything. I said yes. Of course I said yes. He is my son. They moved in on a Saturday in late March. 2 suitcases, a box of kitchen things, and Kristen's houseplant collection, which turned out to be more extensive than either Daniel or I had anticipated. 7 plants. I counted them later. I do not have any particular feel about houseplants, but I mentioned the 7 plants because they're the kind of detail you file away without knowing why, and then later you understand exactly why. Patricia made up the guest room with the good linens. She stocked the refrigerator with things she knew Daniel liked. The specific brand of orange juice, the Greek yogurt, the good deli turkey from the counter, not the packaged kind. That is who she is. Her first response to any situation involving someone she loves is to find something practical she can do for them. She had been doing that her entire life, and it had never once been used against her. Until Kristen. I want to be fair here. I want to be careful. Kristen is not a villain from a story. She is a real person with her own pressures and her own history, and her own way of moving through the world. What she did was wrong. I am not going to soften that. But I also do not think she woke up every morning and planned it. I think it was something that grew, slowly, in the particular way that boundary erosions always grow, one small step at a time, each step so incremental that no single moment announces itself as the moment things changed. The kitchen was the first thing. Kristen had a system, a specific arrangement for the pantry, a particular way she liked the counter organized. Patricia accommodated it. Fine. Then the television. Kristen had shows she watched in the evenings and a preference for watching them in the living room without a lot of conversation happening around her. Patricia started taking her book to the den. Fine. The bathroom schedule shifted to favor Kristen's morning routine. The grocery list began to reflect Kristen's preferences more than Patricia's. The small decisions about what was cooked for dinner, what temperature the thermostat was set to, which parking spot in the two-car garage was used for whose vehicle, all of it, gradually, quietly, reoriented around Kristen's preferences. And Patricia let it happen. Because Patricia is patient. Because Patricia decided the relationship was worth more than any individual grievance. Because Patricia did not want to make trouble between me and Daniel. I was not home enough to see the shape of it clearly. That is what I have to own in this story. Starting in August of that year, I had taken on a part-time consulting arrangement. My former colleague Bill Nakamura had started a small infrastructure advisory firm and needed someone with my background for a series of municipal contract reviews. The work took me away 2 to 3 weeks at a stretch. Cincinnati, Louisville, Pittsburgh, once out to Boise for 11 days. I called Patricia every evening at 7:30, regular as a clock. She always sounded fine. She always said everything was fine. She was not fine. She had just decided to carry it quietly rather than put on me while I was away. I found that out later. I found out quite a lot later. The key was Daniel's idea. In January, so about 10 months after they had moved in, I was heading to Pittsburgh for what turned out to be my longest consulting stretch. 3 weeks, maybe more. Patricia's car had been unreliable, alternator trouble, twice in the prior month, and Daniel said he and Kristen would check in on her, make sure she had groceries, make sure she didn't need anything. I said that was good of him. I meant it. It would just be easier, Daniel said, standing in my garage on a Thursday morning with his hands in his jacket pockets and his breath fogging slightly in the cold air. If we had a key, so we don't have to ring the bell every time we come by. I looked at him for a moment. He is my son. I have known this man since the second he entered the world. I reached up to the key rack by the garage door, the small wooden rack Patricia painted years ago, with a hook for each of us, and I took down the spare. Brass, small dent on the bow from where I dropped it in a parking garage in 2009. I handed it to him. I said, "Don't lose it." He said, "Of course not, Dad." He gave it to Kristen within the week. He never mentioned it to me. I found that out later, too. My Pittsburgh engagement was scheduled to run through Tuesday, April 9th. Flight home at 6:15 p.m., arriving Columbus at 7:44 p.m. Patricia knew. Daniel and Kristen knew. The whole thing was calendared and communicated and settled. On Saturday, April 6th, I finished my last on-site review 3 days ahead of schedule. The municipal client had accelerated their internal approval process, and the remaining documentation work could be completed remotely from Columbus just as easily as from a hotel room in Pittsburgh. My colleague Bill Nakamura called me at 2:30 that afternoon and said, "Gerald, you're done. Go home." I picked up my phone to call Patricia. Her name was right there on the screen. And then I thought, I will just go. I will surprise her. She has always said, I do not do enough spontaneous things. Small gestures. I put the phone back in my jacket pocket, changed my flight, and was in the air by 6:45 p.m. I landed at 9:02 p.m. My 2017 Buick LaCrosse was in the long-term parking lot. I was pulling into my own driveway at 9:23 p.m. on a Saturday night. The house was lit. Living room, kitchen, television flicker through the front window. Looked normal. Looked like home. I pulled my rolling bag from the trunk and walked up the front path with my key in my hand and the specific quiet satisfaction of a man returning to a place he has built and loved for a long time. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. I want to describe what I saw precisely. Precision is how I process things. It is not coldness. It is structure. Structure is what I reach for when I need to stay steady. My living room had been rearranged. My reading chair, a brown leather recliner I have had since 2004, had the original upholstery replaced once in 2013, broken in slowly over 2 decades into something that fits the particular shape of my back, had been moved to the far corner of the room, pushed back, angled slightly, as if it had been repositioned to accommodate a different furniture arrangement. The sofa was at a different angle to the television. My coffee table had on it 2 wine glasses, a half-empty bottle of rose, the remnants of charcuterie board, soft cheese mostly gone, a few crackers, some folded napkins. The television was on, a show I did not recognize. Kristen was on my sofa, a glass in her hand. 2 women I did not know, friends I assumed roughly her age, were on either side of her. All 3 of them looked up when I came through the door. Kristen's face did a quick succession of things. Surprise, calculation, a social smile that arrived about half a second too late. She said, "Oh, Gerald, we didn't think you'd be back till Tuesday." I said, "Where's Patricia?" A pause. One of the women looked at her glass. Kristen said, "She's in the back. She was tired." I set my bag down by the door. I walked down the hallway, past the family photographs of Patricia arranged on the wall in 2007, Daniel at 8 at 12 at his college graduation, Patricia and I on the Cape in 2011, the kitchen at Christmas, past the linen closet, past the bathroom, to the door at the end of the hall, our bedroom, the room Patricia and I have shared for 34 years. I reached for the handle. It did not move. I stood still for a moment. I looked at the door. There's a small sliding latch on the outside of that door, a brass piece, original to the house, installed when the room was still a converted linen closet, before we bought the property. It had been there since 1990. I had not thought about it in at least 15 years. There had never been any reason to think about it. The latch was engaged. I stood in that hallway for exactly 3 seconds. I counted, not consciously. Counting is just what happens when something in me goes very still. The numbers are the stillness finding its shape. 1, 2, 3. I opened the latch. I opened the door. Patricia was in the armchair by the window. The small lamp on the end table was on. She had a paperback open in her lap. I could see the well-creased spine, a book she had been reading for a while. She was in her housecoat. Her reading glasses were on. She looked up when the door opened, and for one moment, maybe half a second, something crossed her face that I can only describe as the expression of a person who has been somewhere alone for a long time and has stopped expecting the door to open. Then she saw it was me. She said, "Gerald." I said, "I'm home." I crossed the room and sat on the edge of bed, close to her chair. I did not ask anything yet. I did not say anything about the latch or the rearranged furniture or the women in the living room. I just sat with her. She kept the book in her lap. We were quiet for several minutes. The lamp made the room warm and small. Outside, faintly, I could hear the television. Then she told me it had been happening for months, not every Saturday, but regularly enough that Patricia had come to expect it. Kristen's friend gatherings had become a fixture of the weekend, and somewhere around month 7 or 8, they had shifted from a thing that happened in the house to a thing that required the house to be arranged around them. Patricia had been asked, gently at first, then with a particular firmness that does not require a raised voice, to stay in the back so the guests wouldn't feel crowded. That was the word Kristen used. Crowded. In her own home, the latch, Patricia thought, had started being used around month 9 or 10. Not every time, but when Kristen wanted to make sure there would be no interruptions, no awkwardness. Patricia said in a careful, measured way, the way she says things she has rehearsed in her own head many times, turning them over, trying to make them as fair as possible. She was not trying to indict Kristen. She was just telling me what had happened in her own house, in the room we have shared for 34 years. She had not told me any of it while it was happening. She said she did not want to cause trouble between me and Daniel. She said she thought it would resolve itself. She said she kept thinking the rough patch would end, and they would find their apartment, and everything would go back to the way it was. I sat with all of that for a long moment. I made a decision right then. Not an emotional decision, not a reactive one, a permanent one. There is a difference between those things, and it is worth understanding. Emotional decisions come from the heat of a moment, and they are often too much or too little. Reactive decisions come from wanting the discomfort to stop, and they rarely address the actual problem. Permanent decisions come from a clear, cold understanding of what is real and what is to change, and they hold. I kissed Patricia on the forehead. I said, "I will handle it." She looked at me. She said, "Gerald, I don't want." I said, "I know. I will handle it quietly." I went back to the living room. Kristen and her friends had not moved, though the energy in the room had shifted. People can feel when something has changed, even if they cannot name it. Kristen was watching me with the careful attention of someone doing a calculation. I said, "Kristen, please call Daniel." She said, "It's getting late, Gerald. He's probably—" "Please call him." She called. Daniel picked up on the second ring. He was at a friend's house. He said, 20 minutes away." I said nothing further. I moved my reading chair back to its proper position, sat down in it, and drank a glass of water and waited. Kristen's friends gathered their things without being asked. They left within 15 minutes, one at a time, quietly, with a specific efficiency of people who understand they should not be present for what is coming. Daniel arrived at 10:41 p.m. He came through the door with that particular energy, the posture of a man who had been trying to figure out during the drive over exactly how much has been said and exactly how bad this is. He looked at Kristen. He looked at me. He started to say something. I said, "Sit down, Daniel." He sat. I said, "I'm going to ask you one question. I want one honest answer. Did you know about the latch?" The room was quiet. The television was off by then. Daniel looked at the table. He was quiet for 4 seconds. I counted those too. He said, "Dad, it wasn't meant to be. That is not a yes or no." Another pause. Then, "Yes." Something inside me settled into a quiet that felt very cold and very final, like a door at the end of a long hallway. Closing, not slamming, just a soft, certain click of a latch finding its seat. I said, "All right." I stood up. I said goodnight. I went to bed. Kristen looked like she was waiting for more. Daniel looked like he was waiting for more. I did not give them more. The more was coming, just not at 11 o'clock at night, not in anger, not in a way that anyone could later describe as a scene. I am not a dramatic man. Slow is scarier. Slow means you are in control. If you have been listening for a while, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing, and it means everything to us. Hit the like button while you're at it, and drop your thoughts and comments. Sunday morning, I was up at 5:47 a.m. Patricia was still asleep. I made a pot of coffee I did not particularly need, and I sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, the same brand I have used since 1987, college-ruled, 50 sheets, and I wrote out everything I intended to do in the order I intended to do it, with the names and phone numbers of the people I needed to call. I wrote it in my ordinary handwriting, not hurried, not pressed hard into page, just a list, a plan. That is how I have always done things that matter. The first call was to Raymond Chu. Raymond is a real estate and estate planning attorney I have known since 2003. I met him when I was handling the documentation for my mother's house after she passed, and I have worked with him on and off since. Our wills, a property matter in 2016, some trust documentation 2 years ago. He is thorough, direct, and not given to unnecessary words, which I have always appreciated. I left a message at 8:15 a.m. He called back at 8:52. I explained the situation clearly and without editorializing. Daniel and his wife had been residing in my home for approximately 13 months past what had been agreed as a temporary arrangement. There had been an incident. I described a latch, and I wanted to formalize a notice to vacate process in a way that was legally clean, civil in tone, and not subject to later dispute. Raymond said, "How quickly do you want to move?" I said, 30 days. I want the notice delivered in writing by Tuesday. He said, "I'll have a draft to you by end of day Monday." I said, "Thank you, Raymond." I hung up, and wrote the time next to his name on the legal pad. 8:52 a.m. to 9:04 a.m. 12 minutes. Efficient. The second call was to First Federal Bank, where Patricia and I maintain our accounts. 14 months prior, at Daniel's request, I had added him as a secondary holder on a household expense account. A practical arrangement, he said, for covering groceries and minor house costs while he was staying with us. The account had a balance of $4,340 at the time of that call. I spoke with a branch manager named Sandra Okafor. I explained that I needed to remove a secondary account holder and asked about the process. MS. Okafor confirmed that as a primary holder with full account authority, which I had been since the account's opening, I could initiate the removal. She said if I came in before 3 p.m., she could process it same day. I was at the branch by 11:15 a.m. The removal was processed at 11:41 a.m. Ms. Okafor was professional and efficient and asked no unnecessary questions. I thanked her and drove home. The third call was to Tom Valles, our insurance broker at Heartland Coverage Group. Tom has handled our homeowners, auto, and supplemental policies for 9 years. 11 months prior, at my own suggestion, I had added Daniel and Kristen to our household policy under a renter's supplemental rider. It seemed the responsible thing to do. I asked Tom to initiate removal with a legally required 30-day written notice. Tom said he would have documentation ready by Tuesday. The fourth item on my list was not a call. It was an email to Bill Nakamura explaining that I needed to extend my remote work arrangement to the end of the month. Bill replied within 40 minutes. He wrote, "Whatever you need, Gerald. Take care of your family." Bill is a good man. I have worked alongside good men for most of my life, and I do not take it for granted. By 2:15 p.m. on Sunday, I had done everything on the list except one item, which required waiting for Raymond's draft and could not be accelerated. I made a second pot of coffee and sat on the back porch. It was April and still cool, but the sun was out and the yard was starting to green up. We have a silver maple in the back corner that Patricia has been tending since we planted it as a 12-foot sapling in 1996. It is a substantial tree now. I sat and looked at it for a while and felt the particular quiet that settles over me when I have made a decision and begun executing it. Not satisfaction exactly, more like the feeling after structure is properly loaded and holding. Everything where it belongs. Forces distributed correctly. No single point carrying more than it was designed to. Daniel knocked on the kitchen doorframe at 3 p.m. He had the look of a man who had spent most of the day in conversation with his wife and had arrived at a negotiating position. He said, "Dad, can we sit down and talk about last night?" I said, "Of course." We sat at the kitchen table. He said that Kristen was sorry, that things had gotten out of hand gradually, and they hadn't recognized how far it had gone, that the latch had started as something Kristen used once, and it had become a habit, without anyone really deciding it should be. He said Mom had never said she was uncomfortable, and if they had known. I let him finish. All of it. I did not interrupt. I did not lean forward. I did not give any signal of where I was going. That is an important discipline. Letting someone fully commit to what they are saying before you respond, so that nothing is left unspoken, nothing held back as a reserve. When he finished, I said, "Daniel, I have 3 things to tell you." He waited. I said, "First, your mother does not ask for things. She has never asked for things. 43 years of marriage, and I cannot give you a list of times she asked for something for herself. That is who she is. The fact that she did not say she was uncomfortable does not mean she was comfortable. It means she was protecting you, and me, and the relationship. That is what she does." He was quiet. I said, "Second, Raymond Chu will be sending a formal notice by Wednesday, 30 days from receipt of the document. I want it to be clean and respectful, and I want us all to behave accordingly." His face shifted. He had not expected that speed. I said, "Third, your name was removed from the household account yesterday. Tom Valles will be sending paperwork on the insurance change. If you need the first month's deposit on an apartment, I will contribute half. That offer is genuine, and it does not expire." He looked at me for a long moment. He said, "Dad, I understand you're upset." I said, "I am not upset, Daniel. I am clear. Those are different things." He said, "Where are we supposed to go?" I said, "You have a job. Kristen has a job. You have been here for over a year longer than we agreed. I believe you have the ability to find an apartment. I want to help you do that, not hinder it. But your mother will not spend one more Saturday in a latched room in her own home. That part is not negotiable, and it is not something I am willing to revisit." He sat with that. I could see him going through stages: protest, calculation, something that might have been shame. He is my son. I know his face. I have known it for 41 years. He said, "Okay, Dad." That was all he said. "Okay, Dad." We sat at the table for another few minutes without speaking. I refilled my coffee. I did not offer him any, which in retrospect was a one small unkindness of the whole affair, and which I noticed at the time and chose not to correct. The formal notice arrived via Raymond Chu on Wednesday, April 10th, delivered by certified mail, one page, civil in language, specific in its terms and timeline. Raymond had also drafted, at my request, a separate written acknowledgement regarding the key. Specifically, the fact that the spare key I provided to Daniel had been given to Kristen without my knowledge or consent. Not a legal document of any consequence, just a record. Daniel signed it on the 14th, without argument, across the kitchen table, with a pen I handed him. He did not read it at length before signing. I thought that was telling. They were out by May 6, 26 days after the notice. I helped Daniel load the larger furniture pieces into the rented truck: the dresser, the mattress frame, the 7 houseplants. We did not talk much while we worked, but we worked together. That meant something to me. Their new apartment was in Westerville, about 11 miles from our house. 2 bedrooms, 2nd floor, a small balcony. Rent was $1,480 a month. The deposit was $1,650. I wrote a personal check for $825, half, and gave it to Daniel when we finished loading the truck. He took it. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at me. He said, "Thank you, Dad." I said, "You're welcome. Call your mother." We shook hands at the curb. It was a Monday morning, overcast, about 58 degrees. A routine day by every measure, except that it was not. Kristen came out to the truck while we were finishing. She said goodbye to me with a word and a nod. She did not go back inside to say goodbye to Patricia. Patricia was in the kitchen. I know because I looked. She was standing by the window over the sink, not watching, just standing there with her hands around her coffee mug. I went back inside. I stood beside her. We watched the truck pull away from the curb. She said, "Do you think they'll be all right?" I said, "I think they'll figure out." She nodded. She kept looking out the window after the truck was gone at the empty stretch of curb. Then she said, "I should have told you sooner." I said, "Yes, you should have." She looked at me. I looked at her. Then she laughed, just a small laugh, more breath than sound, and she said, "That's all you're going to say about it?" I said, "That's all there's to say about it." She shook her head. She refilled her coffee. She went to sit at the kitchen table. After a moment, I sat across from her, and we had our Sunday morning, which it was not. It was a Monday, but it felt like a Sunday morning, the kind that belongs only to 2 people who have been married long enough to know when they have gotten something back. That was 22 months ago. Daniel and I speak on the phone every week or 2. It is not what it was before all of this. Something shifted between us, the way a beam shifts when it has been overloaded, and while it holds, and while I believe it will continue to hold, I do not pretend it is the same beam. We are finding our way, slowly and honestly, which is more than I can say for how we operated during the 13 months they lived here. Patricia started a watercolor class at the Whetstone Community Center, Tuesday and Thursday mornings, 9 to 11. She came home from the first class with cadmium yellow on her left forearm and a story about her instructor, a retired art teacher named Margaret, who apparently delivers critiques with the precision of a surgeon and the delivery of a woman who has absolutely no time for anyone's feelings about it. Patricia was laughing, telling me about her. Standing in the kitchen, in her paint-stained sweatshirt, laughing, free. That is what I was protecting. Not a principle. Not a point I needed to win. This specific woman, in the specific kitchen, laughing on a Tuesday morning with paint on her arm, in the home we have built and tended together for 34 years. There is something I have learned, not from a book, not from any particular moment, but from the slow accumulation of living long enough and paying attention. The people who take the most space rarely notice how much room they are using. They are not always malicious. Often they are simply unaware, and awareness requires either a conversation or a consequence. I tried the conversation in small ways earlier, before I had named what was happening. The consequence, when it came, was clean and permanent and fair. And the room it made, that quiet, ordinary Tuesday morning room, was everything. 43 years of building, one brass latch on the outside of a bedroom door, and a son who said yes when I asked him if he knew. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. If you enjoyed this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of Dad's Raw Revenge. I will see you on the next one.